Hi, everybody. I have some big questions we are going to answer today. So, the first one is, can we choose to believe in God? Well, the short answer is, of course, yes. The long answer will be explained in this video. And we're going to answer some other questions that are very related, like why would someone claim we have no free will? No free will to make choices. Another question, can we logically be coherent as an atheist materialist? Does materialism speak to the modern world? Can it explain our modern experience? Is new atheism dead? Has paganism replaced it? So we're going to look at paganism and its tenets. We're also going to look at different forms of paganism through the centuries. We're also going to ask, what do paganism, collectivism, and the World Economic Forum have in common? Strangely, they have a few things in common, including the idea of human sacrifice. In other words, sacrificing others for your own benefit, sacrificing the farmers in Holland for the benefit of the rich people who fly into Davos each year on their jets to proclaim the whole climate change disaster and to tell the paupers of the world that we have to live up to their expectations to keep our carbon footprint to a minimum, but of course their carbon footprint to a maximum. And so that is another big question. And I want to say hi to Taking Back Eden. Great to see you, John. We're also going to look at how are paganism and Christianity different. Now, paganism is an umbrella term to refer to the Celts, the Norse gods, the Greek gods, the gods of the Aztecs, the gods of India, and many other gods around the world. So really what it is it's a term to describe the spiritual battles that we have going on in this world between the good and evil. And so we'll discuss paganism and also, again, like I mentioned, how it differs from Christianity. Yes, they're selfish, the World Economic Forum. They fly in on their private jets, burning up all kinds of fossil fuel. And when they get there, sometimes just for show, they'll jump onto bicycles and bike from the place where their airplanes drop them off over to the site at Davos, where all of the wealthy are dispersed. Thankfully, we had the Argentinian president at the last couple days ago get in there and talk about what a bunch of hypocrites the people at the WEF are. So I'm S.J. Thomason, and I seek the truth, and I encourage you to do so because truth matters. All right, so let's have a go at it. You can see right here in this slide 3 atheists. The first one is called Cosmic Skeptic. He is the one I'm going to be expanding upon. His words we're going to expand upon. Then the next one is Rationality Rules. And the third one is Matt Dillahunty. Now, Cosmic Skeptic and Rationality Rules have, and that's Stephen Wofford, Rationality Rules, have the advantage of that English, very pristine accent. Sometimes people would take that for a sign of intelligence. And that was one of the advantages, of course, that Christopher Hitchens had back in his heyday when he was busy with his rhetorical arguments against Christianity in numerous debates. And so he had debated and he was sort of a rock star, apparently, according to the atheists, even according to his brother, Peter Hitchens, who has written a book a lot about Christopher and a lot about his own early atheist days called Rage Against God. Highly encourage you guys to listen to that. So anyway, you can tune into this video. The reason why I'm not playing this particular video, although I do have another one lined up here in this video, is because one time I did play Matt Dillahunty in a video and he turned it so that nobody could see my video. They claimed some sort of a copyright thing, and so I was unable to show the video, and I'm not going to do that again. So instead, I'm going to quote what they said about free will. But before we do that, let's talk about apologia. So I have debated apologia on the resurrection of Jesus and the evidence that we have, which is an abundance of evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. If you're looking for whether or not Christianity is true, look no further than the evidence for Jesus' resurrection. I think that gives us ample reason to support Jesus' ministry, life, and calling to us. He saved us. He freed us from our sins and our salvation. He is Lord above all, and we should worship him. We are called to worship him. We are called to worship our creator, not the creation. And that, again, is a distinction between Christianity and paganism, which I'll get into in just a moment. So here's what Apologia said in March 11th, 2019. Atheism isn't a choice. You don't choose your beliefs. You become convinced. If you disagree, just choose to believe otherwise about anything. Now, he said, become convinced. Here's what's interesting about that. What does it take to convince a diehard atheist against atheism? We have shown atheists the evidence for the resurrection, and they say they're not convinced. Matt Dillahunty was in a debate with Mike Licona, who is a Christian out of Houston Christian University. Mike Licona said something about if God wrote evidence in the sky to say that I am alive, I am here, I exist, all this kind of stuff to Matt Dillahunty, would he be convinced? Matt Dillahunty said even that kind of evidence would not convince him. So in other words, there is nothing that you could give to certain atheists to convince them. They have made their minds up. It's a comfort thing for them. They don't like the idea of there being a God. In fact, here is evidence of that. Thomas Nagel, he says, quote, I want atheism to be true and am made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't believe in God, and naturally I hope that I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. Now, why is that? I posed that question before on Twitter, X, and I have also discussed with other people. I think it's a heart thing and not a head thing. In other words, I think that you don't want God to exist because you don't want to live by God's rules. In some cases, it's because you want to be your own God. You can't stomach the idea of having an authority figure over you. Sadly, in a study that I recently composed myself, it's in the journal called Ethics and Behavior, I looked at the world value surveys. I isolated thousands of people from the United States, and I looked at justifications for various moral activities that were morally questionable, things like prostitution, abortion, suicide, etc. And I found that the younger generation, Z and Y, were more likely to justify morally questionable actions than the older generations. They also were less likely to believe in an authority figure, less likely to be patriotic, and less likely to value the importance of God. That was very concerning for me. And I think that that could be attributable to our world of social media and also an increase in an interest in things like paganism and the occult. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. So here's what Cosmic Skeptic said about free will. Here's an exact quote from the video I just showed you from the Atheist Experience. It was a couple of years back, so maybe Cosmic has outlived or outgrown these opinions, but here's what they were at this point. He's a rather famous atheist. He went to Oxford, apparently studied theology and religion. I just watched an interview with him and Richard Dawkins, and I found it fascinating that it seemed like Alex was pushing back on Richard Dawkins and actually representing Christians pretty well in some of our arguments. So I think Alex is actually on his way to Christianity. You can tell him I said that, not that he knows anywhere who I am. I'm just a nobody over here in Florida, but that's what I feel. So here's what Alex O'Connor says, quote, it's either the case that the universe is determined, and what we mean by that is that every single thing in the universe follows a chain of causation, that when I do anything, that's caused by something perhaps happening in my brain. And that's caused by something else in my brain. And maybe that's caused by something that I saw that's external to the brain. And the thing that I saw is caused by something else. And you can trace it all the way back to the beginning of the universe. If that's the case, then everything is running on a train track of causation, and you don't have any control over it because everything that you do is subject to the causation that happened before you existed. That's one option. Now I'm going to refute these in just a second. Give me a second here. We'll get to the next part of his quote. The only other option, because it's either the case that it is true or it's not true. The only other option is that the universe is indeterministic. That means that at some point, when there is some kind of causal chain somewhere in there, there had to be an element of randomness. That randomness could exist outside of your brain or inside of your brain. But either way, randomness, by definition, you don't have control over it. Let me sum up his arguments. We have no control. That's the bottom line. Alex O'Connor's arguments for the existence of humans is we have no control over our brains because our brains are a function of our history, our ancestors, and all kinds of decisions made prior to our existence. Here's the key to his arguments. We're irresponsible robots controlled by forces of nature, living as lucky beneficiaries of chance and randomness on a planet with no purpose, no meaning, and no ultimate truth. Well, the simple fact we all seek purpose and meaning is a delusion, according to people like Alex O'Connor, who believes in a materialistic explanation of the world. We can take the blame for none of our actions. You see how entertaining an idea this would be to an atheist who at one point knows that he'll be standing, knows in the back of his mind, one day he's going to be standing in front of his creator, his maker, and he is going to claim that everything he did in his life had been caused by factors beyond his control. That is the bottom line. That is why they're so likely to claim they have no control. They don't want to take control. They don't want to take personal responsibility. They want to blame it all on functions of their genes, random splats, lucky beneficiaries, cosmic splats, all that kind of stuff. Cosmic skeptic might, quote, thank their God, that's our God, for the rule of law. Because if we have no constraints living as atheists, no constraints, no control, no objective morality, unless we have a rule of law, our society would be a complete disaster. So they should really be thanking God for the fact that he has created structures and societies where we do feel personal control, personal responsibility. And I have evidence of that from multiple studies, which I'll show you in just a moment. Back to more of Cosmic Skeptic. Life doesn't work like Cosmic Skeptic thinks it does. His arguments assume what they call biological determinism. That's separate from theological determinism, meaning that God had caused everything in our existence. Biological is saying that our genes have caused everything, our history of genes, our ancestors, our brain composition, the wiring in our brain, all of that is in control, and we are just operating as mere robots, as dancing to the tune of our DNA, according to people like Richard Dawkins. His arguments suggest our existence is bounded in time with a backward running train that informs all actions today from the past. In other words, instead of a forward running train, as we know time marches on, time moves forward, his train runs backward into the past to grant him freedom from the decisions that he makes today, because he's pulling from the past, saying he is merely a function of his ancestors and their decisions were a function of previous ancestors, and so on and so on and so on as nauseum. Now, the problem, of course, is it's all contingent, because that kind of a system is contingent on life before. And we know that if we go far back enough, we're going to get back to the very first ancestors. And if you go back in the universe to the very first start of the universe, and there has to be an unmoved mover or an uncaused cause. And that, unfortunately, is what breaks the arguments of the atheist. His arguments are bounded in materialism, or the physical. He says we can't explain our immaterial minds separate from the physical components of our brains. The problem with that argument is it ignores abstract concepts, without which our lives are lived through a lens of an ape. In other words, if we have no abstract concepts, we might as well be a dog, an ape, a rat, because that's the level of understanding that we would have of the world around us. However, we know as humans, our level of understanding of the world around us is much more complex. It is full of abstract concepts, again, not explained by materialism. Materialism can't explain the value of art, which is merely a bunch of paint on top of a piece of paper. Materialism would say that it was the value of the paint and the paper, cents, 50 cents maybe $1. But instead, a painting is valued through an abstract way by humans looking at the painting and assessing its value based on what they consider it to be worth. And also, within this idea of no abstract concepts, we have no humor, imagination, human dignity, human value, love, joy, hope, truth, propositions, numbers, freedom, artistic evaluations, beauty. Notice one of the things the communists did when they came to our societies, starting mainly around 1918, 1917, first in the USSR and then spreading all throughout the globe, one of the things that we saw that they came is they hated the idea of love for your neighbor. They wanted to, of course, have you rat out on your neighbors. They hated the idea of beauty. Communism made sure that the world around was quite ugly. Buildings were ugly. They weren't built beautifully architecturally sound. They were built in ways that were just ugly little boxes. And so communism was not something that was building the kind of churches that we saw from medieval times. Communism also took away the value of human dignity. Human value was conferred by other people. You can see that same problem playing out with unborn children today. The value is conferred by the mother, assessing value of her child. If the mother named the child or assessed value for the child should live. If the mother gave no value to the child could die. That is a system that is horrible. And unfortunately, that is where we're living today. How did it get like this? Well, a lot of that comes from communism. So let's distinguish Christianity and collectivism. Christianity says, and collectivism again relates to Marxism, communism, and eventually I'm going to talk about its relationships to paganism. So Christianity says all humans have intrinsic value. It's conferred by our Creator. That is part, again, of our U.S. Constitution, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, and of course it goes all the way back thousands of years to Genesis 1:27. We are made in the image of God. We're God's image bearers, man and woman, made as God's image bearers. We have personal accountability to the world, but also to our Creator. So if we're not held accountable by the world, maybe we're a mass murderer, somehow escapes judgment, like someone like Joseph Stalin did, we can rest assured that eventually this person will stand in front of his maker or her maker and will be held accountable, period. We're not blamed for actions of the group into which we're born. In other words, unlike what we saw in other societies, it doesn't matter if we're born into a group of, say, white people, black people, whatever it is, we're not taking accountability for our ancestors before us because it's not our fault the way our ancestors acted before us. Of course, that goes against the atheist philosophy of someone like Cosmic Skeptic, who is basically acting out the brain cells of people who came prior to before him. We're independent. We like democratic processes, free markets, and we believe in the idea of human motivation. Human motivation is the essence that underlies exactly why communism fell. Because communists decided that everyone would be distributed amount of goods. Not everyone, of course, not farm owners, but many people in the cities were given the goods. It didn't matter exactly how hard they worked. Everyone was evenly distributed goods. And that is one reason why it failed. See Francis Fukuyama's book and many of his speeches on China and why China decided to go to free markets, to move towards free markets. It's still communist, but why it's decided to move towards free markets in the 1970s. It was interesting. Let me just quickly digress real quick. What they did in China was they had split up plots of land and they had given people responsibility over plots of land. So they said, okay, this entire group is responsible for, say, these 10 plots of land. And when everyone was responsible, people didn't work as hard because they realized if you worked hard or if you didn't work hard, we all got the same output. So human motivation was basically stifled. What happened was in one little plot of land, people decided to take individual accountability. So one family took one plot, another family another plot, and they realized that if they worked really hard on their plot, they could benefit from what came out of that plot of land. And the government looked at that and realized, okay, our system is failing, it's terrible, and it's one of the reasons why we're all impoverished and millions of people have died. And so communists decided to move towards capitalism, at least opening up some free markets starting in the 1970s. Sadly, recently it's gone more authoritarian under Xi Jinping, but I digress. He also is known for human atrocities. He's got people like 1.8 million Uyghurs locked up. Those are ethnic Muslims locked up in concentration camps right now. The world is not doing anything about that, which is sad because people are unfortunately scared of the size of China and its gross domestic product and its potential military output. How is Marxism different from that? Marxism says no individual accountability beyond the government. You're only accountable to the government. You're not accountable to your neighbors or to your creator. They also believe in group culpability. Okay, so you could be born into a prison or what they called in Russia, the gulags, or North Korea. You were born into that and you were guilty because your parents were guilty of some crime. And if your parents were guilty of the crime in North Korea, your neighbors, their relatives, their uncles, their aunts, their grandparents, everyone was guilty of the crime because one person within the group is guilty of the crime. That is exactly what's going on in China. Why the Uyghurs are locked up is because a couple of Muslims decided to do some heinous things. And rather than holding those two people accountable because of their heinous actions, their terrorist actions, China rounded all of the Uyghurs, over 1 million Uyghurs up, locked them all away for re-education. Speaking of re-education, Canada is doing the exact same thing to Jordan Peterson right now, which is an atrocity. So we have that. You're guilty also by virtue of which ethnic group you're born into. We have Robin DiAngelo referring to white guilt merely because people 100 years ago did some pretty atrocious things, therefore we're guilty of it today. It's ridiculous. And also the guilt of sex. So if you're male, female, you could be held accountable for the actions of people who came way before you, which is completely ridiculous. Now, Chinese and Marxism and collectivism also has forced actions for the benefit of the collective. So again, I mentioned re-education. In some of the Nordic countries, they have this idea of very high taxes. You're taken care of from cradle to grave. Some people like that. In Sweden, they only have about 10 million people, about half the population of Florida. But in Sweden, if you make, say, the equivalent of US dollar 60 grand, you're paying about 60% in taxes. That money goes to daycares, it goes to college, if you can get into college and you choose the major they agree with, and it goes to that. Then there was the Venezuelan socialist experiment. They called it socialism. It was really communism, which is essentially the governmental takeover of the means of production. So Chavez took over much of Venezuela, much of its infrastructure, it took over transportation, oil, all kinds of industries, and drove the whole thing to the ground. That is what we need to look out for. Interestingly, you have socialists, communists like Bernie Sanders and Sean Penn, who used to be in support of Chavez, who thought he was just a dream because he was subsidizing gas and bread and other things that were needed. And unfortunately, he did that to the detriment of his entire populace. Though Chavez's daughter sitting on 2 billion, the rest of the nation is eating cake. So it's a demotivating system. Okay, so then we get to some studies to show you that the world knows those systems are flawed. Marxism, collectivism is a joke. It will never operate. Sadly, it's still in operation in some places, but it is operating at a putter because it, in some cases, unless they've taken free markets into account, they're running the government into the ground. They treat the government as gods. And we've seen studies that have shown us that people do value humane orientation, meaning you value benevolence, kindness to the in-groups and to out-groups, even to strangers. So the Globe study of 62 societies realized that everyone in the globe who was in that survey said that we ought to be very humane, even though no society said that they were terribly humane. I mean, they were humane, but they knew that they could be much better. Schwartz said the highest values across all societies were number 1, benevolence, and 2 and 3, or 3 and 2, were universalism, which is kindness to the outgroup, plants and other living forms of life, and the kindness to the planet, nature, and then self-direction, again, going back to this personal responsibility. Schwartz said that we all know that's valuable, even if we're in societies that unfortunately shirk that, like communist societies, or societies veering towards Marxism, or these freaks in the World Economic Forum who are closet Marxists. That's really what they are, closet Marxists. John Kerry is the biggest hypocrite on the planet, but I'm going to show you evidence why in just a moment. Also, why Obama has shown levels of hypocrisy. Even though I voted for the man, I'm unfortunately seeing some stuff lately that I'm not impressed by. Kinnear and colleagues, 2000, he said 7 major world religions realized that all of us share a commitment greater than oneself. Now, this even goes to the American atheists and the United Nations. We also realize the value of self-respect with humility, self-discipline, and acceptance of personal responsibility. We value respect and caring for others, the golden rule, and caring for other living things. You can see how all 3 of these studies relate quite closely. The bottom line in these studies is these show you true human motivations. They show you true human values. They show you evidence of Romans 2:15, that God's imprinted on our conscience a certain set of values that are consistent with Jesus's Sermon on the Mount. So what does atheism offer you? If you're an atheist and you think it's great, here's what Richard Dawkins, famous atheist who wrote The God Delusion, he had this idea of a blind watchmaker, which makes no sense. He said the universe we observed has precisely the properties we would expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Interestingly, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who recently, she had left the Muslim faith years ago. She was a new atheist. They said she was probably the fifth horseman of atheism. She, interestingly, decided that she identifies now as a Christian. Now, I don't know if she's a cultural Christian like the Tom Holland type. Tom Holland wrote the book Dominion, which I highly recommend. I don't know if she's that type where she's taking Christianity for its moral blessings and moral obligations, or if she has looked into the truth behind Christianity. You do want to know the truth. I would assume that everybody is in quest for the truth. And if you are, and you look for the evidence of the crucifixion and resurrection, I'm sure you'll come to Christianity for those reasons rather than just its moral obligations, which tend to be very good moral obligations, which society has been run quite effectively by over the last 2,000 years, especially in the West. So here's what Richard Dawkins has to say. So here's something I just wanted to show you. We're going to get to this little nugget of a video, and you guys are going to enjoy it. So let me just get to play this. I want to say hi to everybody. See, Taking Back Even, Utopia Buster says atheism is waiting around for evolution to create utopia. And Nikki says TGIF, thank God it's Friday, all from Isley, Portland. And Taking Back Eden says, go against your God-given senses. Yes, I stand by my claim. Yeah. So to choose atheism is to go against your senses that we're creation, and creation requires a creator, a moral lawgiver. If we have morality, if we have the objective moral code and obligations to do what's right, or what's truthful, what's fair, what's kind, it clearly comes with a moral obligator or a moral lawgiver. I mean, that's just one explanation for how we know we have a source of our morality. We wouldn't all realize all of these values that I just cited coming from those studies if we didn't have some sort of a moral lawgiver who gave us these values. And so we do have that. And so that's pretty important. I think that's pretty wonderful, and I hope you guys enjoyed that little snippet from that video. And so, all right, so I want to say hi to Coffee Smug and Utopia. Hope you guys enjoyed that. So let's get back to this. So here's what's going on with paganism. So let's take a look at some of the stuff that's going on in the world. So let me just get back to. So bottom line is Richard Dawkins did see the idea of panspermia, which is saying that he's just putting off the idea of our God and saying that maybe there's a God in some other part of the universe that created life, and then somehow the life was seeded over here to the world, and we had now replicating cells. And so he doesn't know exactly how it formed. He doesn't want to give credit to God or the creator, and instead he really is kind of his own God. So here's the interesting thing going on. I've been looking at this paganism. And so if you go back to the Roman Empire and centuries before that, you're going to see that pagans operated in pretty much anywhere in the world. It's kind of an umbrella collective term. It refers to Celts. It refers to the Norse gods, the Greek gods, the Roman gods. You can go back to, some would say, even the Hindus in some ways worship multiple gods. They're polytheistic, combination of pantheistic too. Some believe that gods are part of nature. Some of the pagans, they believe that God is in the trees, which was one of the reasons why when one of the saints chopped down a tree, a lot of pagans were pretty horrified. And apparently it's in the rise in Europe. And so I've seen some videos lately where people are kind of admiring what their ancestors did. They want to take the good stuff out of paganism and leave the bad stuff behind, because these pagans all around the world were sacrificing humans for the benefit of crops. We have evidence of that, lots of evidence from the Celts, the Norse, the Nordic gods, what's called the Vikings. We have plenty of evidence, tons of evidence over there in Canaan, other evidence in the Philistines. We definitely have evidence all around the globe, the Aztecs, the Mayans. We have evidence of human sacrifice. And it's the idea that you were out of control way back when. You saw these weather events. You felt like God had some control over the weather. And at first, maybe sacrifice animals and other things to gods. And then they would do this ultimate sacrifice of their own children. Now, the reason why I find that incredibly coincidental to see this operate all over the world through centuries is because it's completely counterintuitive that you would kill your own child for a God you can't see. So you're saying, I'm going to go and sacrifice someone else. That's the idea of paganism. It's never the same as Christianity, which is Jesus sacrificing himself for our benefit and our salvation. Instead, it's you going and sacrificing someone else to help you. You can see how World Economic Forum people want to do that. And so it's on the rise. You can see right here, it went from 11,000 to 74,000, according to one study. The Economist cited that. Here's some differences between Christianity and paganism. So Christianity is rooted in Catholicism. Jesus said, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail. Also, it's in Eastern Orthodox, Anglicanism, Protestants, so lots of different denominations of Christianity. Paganism has also lots of different forms. So it's practiced by Druids, Wiccans, that's witchcraft, Celts, Norse gods, Greece, Roman, and Aztec, Native American gods. So that's the source of paganism. A lot of pagans worship nature. They don't like when you say they worship creation, but that's what they're doing. They're not worshiping the creator, rather they worship the creation. They find that insulting, but it's the truth. Many worship trees, the sun, the moon, the earth, cycles, the weather. Now you can see how that kind of coincides with people who are focused today on climate change. And climate change is one of those things where they say we need to reduce our carbon input. And at first it was about global warming. Then some say it's global chill. Then some say it's hostile global climate. And no matter what, the climate activists are at a win-win, because no matter what our climate does, they attribute it to climate change. And they don't take into account thousands of years of history with our climate changing. So if you go back thousands of years, you're going to see the number of parts per million for carbon in the atmosphere was, well over 100 times what we have today. And so we have seen examples through recent history going way back, thousands of years. You can see where we have had different we've had different ice caps, we've had different glaciers, we've had all kinds of different things going on in the world, and the climate has been volatile. Up until about 10,000 years ago, it was very volatile, according to Hugh Ross in one of his books. And so paganism, also the idea of human sacrifice, we still see that today. Let's not forget to mention the unborn children. Selfishness, the idea of the self, exalting selfies and the self above all others. We are our own gods. And that's one of the problems. They have a lot of pride. They speak of pride. We see pride parades, pride in the ancestors or in ancient cultures, ancient rituals, and ancient traditions. Worship of creation. That is what construes paganism. However, Christianity focuses on Jesus' sacrifice. He sacrificed himself. It's like if we sacrifice ourselves for the benefit of others. And he did it because he was the only one uniquely qualified who was without sin. It was like the sinless Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Have mercy on us. He exalts the idea of the meek will inherit the world. Selflessness, give up yourself, carry your cross. These are things Jesus stands for, and I think all of the world would benefit from that. Humility. He always says the pride goes before the fall. Jesus realizes and spoke to us about we're just renters in this world. Nothing we accumulate in this world matters. He said, don't pile up gold here on this earth. Don't put your money here on this earth where it will rot. Put all of your investment in heaven, in the next world. As C.S. Lewis said, aim for heaven and you get the earth thrown in. Aim for earth and you get neither. Christianity worships our creator, and that's ordered rightly. That's how God created us, as a life form, children of God who worship him. Now, if Christianity's been good for society, yes, it has. People have argued this for many many years, but a really great book, if you haven't read it yet, is Tom Holland's Dominion. And he talks about Christianity's contribution to hospitals, universities, the elevation of the poor. In the old days, they used to believe, if we go back thousands of years, women were less valued, so they would expose them on the streets. They would lay them out for dead if they didn't want to raise them, because women, of course, came with dowries. They were an expensive thing to have. And human dignity wasn't there. Human dignity was conferred by others. The wealthy were considered blessed by the gods. The poor were considered cursed. Now, Jesus came around and resurrected a new idea. He said, the meek will inherit the world. The poor were blessed. To whom much has been given, much is expected. Some of the last will go first, and the first will go last. Those kind of values are what have bled into our society today and form the undercurrent of everything that we know in the West. We also, Christians, were heavily involved in ending modern slavery and the awful practice that was in the antebellum years. That was led by people like William Wilberforce out of the United Kingdom. And others. We had lots of people who were coming out of Christian churches and deciding that they realized that treating other humans as less than human is something you should not do. It goes against our Constitution, even though we've seen it in both unborn children, in people during the antebellum slavery period, and of course, during the Nazi period, the exact same thing. And we're seeing it today. We see it today in parts of the world where people are discounting some of the evil atrocities that occurred on October 7th in Israel and pretending that those are at all morally justified. You don't bake a baby in an oven and claim there's any moral justification for that, period. I shouldn't have to argue that. We have intrinsic human value. That's part of the Christian belief system, and it's really a wonderful thing. Now, what is our guidance for going against paganism and witchcraft and the stuff that people are starting to take up? Now, I've heard college kids are starting to take this up. I've heard that some younger people think that witchcraft and the occult is great to do. They play with Ouija boards. They don't realize they're tapping into the demonic. That's what you're doing. If you get a Ouija board, you start playing around with tarot cards. You go to people to tell your fortunes, fortune tellers. You go to sorcery, magic. You do spells and witchcraft. You are tapping in the demonic. That's all you're doing. And it's already been predicted. It says it in Deuteronomy 18:10-14. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering, AKA what there did is human sacrifice all throughout pagan history. Continued, anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens or a sorcerer or a charmer or a medium or a necromancer or one who inquires of the dead, for whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God. For these nations which you are about to dispossess, listen to fortune tellers and to diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do this. Another really good verse, speaking to the idea of choice, is Joshua 24:15. As for me and my house, we will choose the Lord. So it's the idea that you could choose other gods, other spiritual beings in this world, part of the spiritual battle that's going on. But Joshua says, as for me and my house, we will choose the Lord. Believing in God is a choice. Otherwise, Psalm 82 also says, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Selah, give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods, Son of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. The first part is about the spiritual battle. According to Michael Heiser in his book Unseen Realm and others who have studied this, God had given the lands around Israel to many other gods, if you want to call them gods. They were spiritual beings. You can see in the book of Daniel, we have a reference to that. by Daniel. They had both Gabriel and Michael appeared to Daniel, but we have references to the god of Persia. So gods were given lands, and God basically took them away. So he says, "Arise, O God, judge the earth." That's Jesus. Jesus came and reclaimed the land. That's one of the reasons why the Apostle Paul was so willing to go all throughout the Roman Empire, all throughout the kingdom, all the way to the stretches of places like Spain, because he wanted to reclaim the land. That's what he had been commanded to do by Jesus. Jesus now had inherited everything. He was the one who was over the earth. And so he reclaimed it from them. John 14:6 and 16:33 gives us Jesus's role. He said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Now bring that over to Oprah Winfrey, who claims that no matter what our path, no matter what our walk, could be anywhere in the world, any belief system at all, we're all going to heaven eventually. That is this modern ideal of universalism, which the Bible heavily debunks in many places, including this verse right here, which is quite specific. You are not getting to God, you are not getting to heaven unless you go through Jesus's door, period. He also said, "I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world." Do you know anyone who's lived in this life who hasn't gone through some sort of troubles? No. Well, we were promised that. Troubles build us. It's the idea of making us stronger. Suffering is what builds souls. So who are the pagans worshiping? Now, the serpent, this is from Genesis 3, was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord had made. He said to the woman, "Did God actually say you shall not eat of any tree in the garden?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden. Neither shall you touch it, lest you die." But the serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." The whole idea with the serpent is he wanted to be like God. He tried to have others worship him. He and a third of God's angels were kicked out of heaven. Jesus saw them fall from the sky, and they were relocated to the middle of the earth. That's where they're located. That is where hell is. According to many saints, hell is in the central part of the earth, in the core, where it burns fire and sulfur and smells and is a permanent condition of darkness. That is hell, and that is where they reside. But they also have been given some level of freedom to roam around the earth, certain of them. Some saints and seers in recent years, over the past couple hundred years, have claimed that Satan's been given more freedoms. And that came about with one of the popes in the 1800s. In the middle to the end of the 1800s, somebody said, it was a pope who said he heard the voices of Satan and Jesus in the Vatican. And this idea that Satan asked for 100 years so that he could basically wreak havoc. He said that he would be able to turn many people towards him if he had this window of time. And of course, some believe the window of time started then. Others believe it started with 1917, around the time of Fatima. But anyway, that was the idea, is because of our sins, our many sins, we're operating in like a Sodom and Gomorrah type of existence, that demons have more freedom to roam around. And that's a pretty scary idea when you think about it. So do we have serpent gods? Yeah, interestingly, say if you go into pagans, and I'm just got a couple of quick samples here coming out of Europe, because that's where it seems like paganism has been increasing. But serpent gods are all over the ancient world. Serpent gods. Now, we of course saw the serpent in Genesis 3. We also see the Norse serpent god Jormungandr. And so we have that example, a serpent god. We also have another serpent god, just to give another example, the Celtic snakes, the goddess Cora, and then of course Saint Patrick, going way back when, hundreds of years ago, supposedly drove the snakes out of Ireland. Some have said that snakes were never in Ireland, but they did have these beliefs in snakes according to the pagan belief system coming out of Scotland and the Nordic countries and other places. So there was a belief in these sort of satanic serpent-like gods. Now, if you're worshiping a serpent, think about what you're doing. Think about, they say that it's about the serpent shedding skin and rebirth. I doubt that. I think it's about evil. And I think that that's just showing his colors, the source of evil. So, who are pagans worshiping? Well, I believe we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. If you look at the barbaric ways that pagans sacrificed people, how in the Aztec times they put them at the top of a temple, they literally cut their hearts out, and then they toss them over the side to be fed to the dogs. If you looked at what happened in the Celts, and also with the Norse gods, the Vikings, what they would do is some really egregious things, which they're finding now when they find these bodies in bogs that had somehow been preserved in some ways. They can see that their heads had been beaten, struck very heavily. In many cases, where their necks were, slit, all kinds of stuff. But they had to go through some sort of a torture, and only evil gods would require such an awful thing. And I think that they did require that. Like, I'm not saying that the pagans made up this stuff because they were trying to appease their gods. I'm saying that the gods did inform them that if they did do this through their worship and their worshiping demons, the demons told them to do this, and the demons would grant them certain, quote, blessings in crops and fertility and other things like that. Fertile soil, not fertile people. Now, here's an interesting thing. So if you guys watched the recent economic forum, the World Economic Forum. Now, World Economic Forum came about in the 70s with Klaus Schwab. He had this vision that they was going to get together all of these leaders from around the world. They were going to create a new world, a new government, a one world government. They basically think of themselves as higher than mighty, way better than us. And the recent convention just happened in Davos, Switzerland. And it's interesting because they put this crazy witch here, and she went around and said some sort of a weird curse. And I didn't want to play this because who knows what this curse is. I didn't want to curse you with whatever this weird curse was. But then she went and she breathed all over these people on a panel. Like, she blew her breath at them as she cursed them. And why would they allow such a weird thing? But we can expect probably some pretty evil stuff to come out of the World Economic Forum, thanks to the blessings of the witch, witchcraft, the Wiccans, and the pagans, and pagan ideas. Now, what are pagan ideas? Again, the self is exalted. We are our own gods. We are superior to God. We are in line with the earth. We're going to worship the earth. We're going to take control over the world through the guise of climate change, and we are going to be the climate czars. So you have hypocrites over there. People like John Kerry. Now, I'm not going to play this video of John Kerry. I've got a link if anyone wants to clip onto it. But John Kerry was coming out of this. At first, he's talking about everyone reducing their climate footprint. But on the other hand, they pointed out that he has multiple homes. He has private jets. He flies around the world as if he's holier than thou. But then he tells the peons, the rest of the world, that we're not allowed to run farms because of methane. We're not allowed to have rice production because rice has too much production of carbon. We're not allowed to do all kinds of other things. It even says that we should be eating bugs because they want to reduce the amount of meat because of methane production. And again, they want to reduce carbon. In fact, someone from the World Economic Forum was quoted in a business magazine in 2016. He said, by 2030, no one will own anything and everyone will be happy. Now, of course, that didn't mean no one will own anything. It meant only the World Economic Forum, BlackRock, very wealthy people like Bill Gates buying up farmland. They will own something. We will all be renting from them. We will have no way to achieve any sort of self-sufficiency and wealth. It's very unfortunate because one of the American dreams here is to be able to buy real estate. And because of what BlackRock's done in places like Florida, where I live, they've run the prices of real estate up through constant demand and our diminished supply. And our prices are pretty exorbitant. The other things that they've done is get involved in local governments, which have charged rather excessively for building costs, permits, things like that. But I digress. The point is, it's very difficult for the younger generation now to buy a house here in Florida. And that's very unfortunate. And it's a function of these nitwits who are restricting, who are getting in there and buying up a lot of our stuff so that they can rent it back to us. And again, very unfortunate stuff coming out of the hypocrites. But let's see what else the hypocrites are doing. Oh, look at this. If they believe that the sea levels are going to rise to astronomical levels and we should all be fleeing from the sea, then why are people like Obama living on the sea at Martha's Vineyard, living right there on the water? Clearly, he does not truly believe we're going to have a problem with sea level rise in at least our generation. Same thing with Carrie. Look at this lovely little ditty here on the Nantucket. So I see a lot of hypocrites. I see a lot of problems. I see people holding up a lot of their money, unfortunately, in a place that makes no sense. And so here's the conclusion of this entire little idea here. We're in the midst of a spiritual battle between good and evil. What is the truth? Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. All other gods that you hear about, pagan gods, any gods, the Norse gods, the Celt gods, the Hindu gods, the Buddhist gods, any gods that you hear about are demons. And they're represented often in snakes, coincidentally, very similar in alignment with Genesis 3. They always seem to practice human sacrifice. Now, we, of course, see that today all throughout the world. It was the early 1920s when Russia first legalized abortion, and now we see it all over the world. And now we see that millions of very innocent lives have been lost and everything snuffed out from their existence thanks to human selfishness and this idea of elevating ourselves. Now, if you have unfortunately committed that sin, there's obviously Jesus is ready for you to speak to him about that, to ask for forgiveness and to move on. So if you're in that boat, which many people unfortunately are, a lot of us, and I say us, we're duped. Back in our 20s, I was guilty of driving a friend to a clinic. So I'm not innocent there. I have also had to go and ask for forgiveness for my accomplice ways. So that was an issue. So all of the gods are represented by snakes, human sacrifice, pride, selfishness, worship of the earth, ancestor worship, magic, and witchcraft. God condemned these ancient and current practices. I cited the Bible verses to support that. But despite condemnation, some insist on kicking against the goad in living in sin. Christianity focuses on selflessness, reliance on Jesus, and the truth. And then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So good to see all you guys in here. I see what we have here. Utopia Buster says they're selling that property after Oblami had his cook unalived? What is this? Still building an estate in Hawaii oceanfront. Whoa. Didn't even know about that, but I never heard of the term unalived. I'll have to look into that. So so we have all this kind of stuff. We've got a coffee smug, Nikki, but if my soul is perfected by the start, then would I choose evil? Yeah, we don't have perfect souls. We're all born with, unfortunately, a human nature to sin. And the only way to really get over it, I've found, is to call on Jesus and to ask for help. And to ask for his help and to ask for saintly intercessions and, other people to help us, have people pray for you, ask your friends to pray for you if you have Christian friends, ask others to pray for you. Free will is something that we all have, and it's something that we shouldn't abuse. And so I want to say thank you to everybody for coming in today. I hope you love this, like this video. I hope you like this kind of content. I'm going to have 2 really cool people on my channel very soon. So I have Justin Brierley of Unbelievable coming on my channel. He is going to talk about his latest book. And he's talking about the surprising rebirth of belief in God. And so we're going to talk about that coming up very soon. Also in that same week, the 29th and 31st week, we're also going to have from Hugh Ross's group, actually Reasons to Believe, we're going to have Dr. Fuzz Rana. And he also has a book, and he's talking about how we're fit for a purpose. He's a biochemist. Now, that's not my background, so I'm going to have to defer to him on all the scientific explanations. But he has found like God's fingerprint in our chemistry, and he's going to explain that. And so people who think that science is the way to go, that's how we can explain the whole world. Well, God has left his fingerprint not only in our universe, in our cosmology, but Fuzz Rana can show us that God has left his fingerprint also on our very beings. In fact, even on our fingers, look at your fingerprint. Did you realize that that's made like a Fibonacci sequence, and just like seashells and and sunflowers and all these other sequences that we see throughout the universe and galaxies. Even in your fingerprint, God has signed his very image. And so you can see that. So thank you, everybody. I hope you guys have a great day. Please like and subscribe and do come again. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Thank you.